The brain is a filing cabinet. It's a hard drive for all of our past experiences. And the more that we re-engage in anything, whether it's helpful or unhelpful, we're forming patterns. And the more times that we re-engage in a pattern, the stronger that pattern gets.
83% of Americans identify as not very happy, which can hold you back and negatively affect your relationships and your business. On this podcast, we discuss the proven steps to happiness so you can restore balance and rekindle your joy.
Welcome to How to Be Happier for Entrepreneurs. This is the podcast where we redefine success and we get to explore what it takes to live fully, lead powerfully, and feel genuinely free. Not just free in your life, but free on the inside and free in the lives that you've built. So today's episode is part one of a special two-part series with George Haymaker. And this conversation is going to hit home, I have a feeling, for a lot of people. George is a former entrepreneur who reached the top professionally while silently unraveling personally. After hitting rock bottom with substance abuse, he didn't just get clean, he got curious. Curious about why he was stuck, curious about the brain, and curious about how transformation actually works. So please, please, please listen closely and welcome George Haymaker.
Hey, Yvonne. How are you? Great to be here. Hello, everyone.
So today we are going to discover not only what saved George's life, it gave him a new mission, and how he helps others rewire their minds, reshape their habits, and recover not just from addiction, but from misalignment. The silent disconnection so many of us feel beneath the success that we have on the outside. Before we jump in, a quick thank you to our sponsor, Limitless You. If you're tired of white knuckling your way through healing and want real sustainable change, this is the work that helps you get there. So let's just take 1 minute to listen to our sponsor.
Hi, I'm Brad Chandler. For over 20 years, I flipped 4,500 homes, chasing success I thought would bring peace. What I didn't realize was the stress and chaos weren't from my business. They were signals of deeper issues.
And I'm Yvonne. My path was different, but equally eye-opening. I spent years transforming organizations into high-performing powerhouses, yet I neglected my own well-being. When I began uncovering subconscious patterns and listening to my body, everything changed.
That's why we founded Limitless You, to help business owners and executives like you uncover and conquer the subconscious beliefs holding you back. Whether it's the stress of business chaos, overworking, relationship problems, or anxiety and self-doubt, these are signals, indicators of deeper patterns that can be rewired to unlock your full potential.
Imagine building a business that fuels your joy and fulfillment.
If you're ready to stop surviving and start thriving, visit unlocklimitlessyou.com and book a free session.
Let us help you build a life that doesn't just look good, but also feels good.
All right, we're back. Welcome again, George. I'm so excited to have you here. We hop right into it on this podcast. You know how entrepreneurship works. A lot of things to do and not a lot of time to do it. So we want to give people tactical, like real things that apply to their life. Not in a year from now, not in 6 months from now, but today. So, George, we asked you what your magic wish was. And your wish was that everyone knew how to train their brain and design their mental life. Share with our listeners, what was the moment you realized that you had to redesign your brain? And what did the very beginning of that look like?
Well, what instantly comes to mind is hitting bottom. I had lived life a certain way for 52 years and it didn't turn out so well. And my difficulty was, the blind spot that I had no idea that how I was living was unusual or abnormal. It's what I knew. And I also didn't understand that it could be different. I didn't understand the brain. I didn't understand how the brain constructs mental experiences. I didn't understand that any and all of that could be changed. So I was a grinder as an entrepreneur. I just, wanted to find significance, find achievement, accomplishment. I had grown up kind of short of that. And so I was always in search of it, which I think is why I went into being an entrepreneur. And I just was on this hamster wheel, a stressed out, burned out mess, and coping with that mental discomfort with substances. And that's the way it went for me for better part of 30 years until addiction grabbed a hold of me and wouldn't let go. And it became more important than anything else in my life. And at the end, I was just complete hostage to it and hit a hard bottom. Consequences were piled high. And I was like that mouse at the end of the maze who was turning left, turning right, trying to figure out any way possible to continue leading the life I was leading. But I was out of options. I was at the end of the maze, and the only thing left in that at the end was a room with a mirror in it, and I had to take a hard look in that mirror and decide
Yeah.
that enough was enough. And I was at that point I was getting ready to leave this world and move on. But I summoned the strength one last time to dig deep and try to see if there was a different way, and that started my path to recovery. And I'll leave it at that, and we can go to the next thing you want to discuss. But
Yeah, I want
sure.
to pull on that for a little bit. You said a couple things, and I always tell people, like, just because it's normal doesn't mean it's healthy. So when you were saying it wasn't normal, you actually probably were closer to normal.
It
I
was
don't
my
think you're,
normal. Yeah.
yeah. And if you looked around, it looked normal, right? Like, I was in consulting for 25 years. There was a lot of drinking, a lot of substance abuse. It was normal, right? To work 12 hours, on the way home, grab a bottle of wine, sit down with Sex in the City and binge watch that until the next day I got up and started it all over again. Every once in a while, added a chunk of Dubliner cheese with that bottle of wine, but that was normal. That was normal. And I wasn't alone, and you weren't alone. And I'm sure if you're listening, you probably have done something similar, right? So when we look around and we feel like, oh, we're taught to be normal, but normal isn't healthy most times anymore. So when my kids tell me, Mom, you're kind of weird, I'm like, kind of woo woo. I'm like, I'd rather be weird than normal because number one, normal is boring and it's probably not healthy either. So I want to ask you, hindsight's a little bit 2020, not always 2020, but it gets clear. Like if you do a subconscious safari, like I take my clients on, but even without it, if somebody's listening and they haven't hit that rock bottom, they haven't hit that wall, like you painted such a wonderful picture. I want to add a little color to it. I want to add some specifics to it. What might people recognize as maybe not red flags, but pink flags, orange flags, some hue that means, whoa, stop before it's too late? Right? Because you hear change comes from inspiration or desperation. That is true. Yours was desperation. Mine was desperation in an unsafe marriage with actually somebody that had an alcohol problem. What can people do now to see before they hit rock bottom? Like, what do you wish you would have been like, oh, yeah, now I can see. And here's where I could have taken a different turn in that maze.
Yeah. I think the signposts are mental friction, mental discomfort. And that can take various forms. But, you know, generally it ends up in anxiety, depression. But it's clearly um, experiences that we're having mentally, which are made up of emotions, thoughts, behaviors that, are unproductive, they're unhelpful, they're unwanted, they're uncomfortable. Um, and so I call all of those things mental friction. And so those are the warning signs, right? And in my case, I would deal with that mental friction uh, by coping with substances.
Yeah.
And so clearly, if your mental friction is causing you to cope in unhealthy ways, and we all know we're doing it at the time, if we're paying attention, that our response, our patterns that we develop neurologically are that we don't feel comfortable, we're uneasy, we're unsure, you name it. And what actions do we take? What behavior is our response? And in my case, it was using substances, and I would feel better. And so that became my loop that I continued to regurgitate. And the problem with that is that, the brain is a filing cabinet. It's a hard drive for all of our past experiences. And the more that we re-engage in anything, whether it's helpful or unhelpful, we're forming patterns. And the more times that we re-engage in a pattern, the stronger that pattern gets. The more emotional salience that there is in that pattern, uh, the more meaning and the stronger that pattern gets. And by pattern, I'm talking physiologically about strings of neurons that come
Yeah.
together and connect, and they basically form the physiological representation of these mental patterns that we have. And so they're like roots of a tree. And so if you think about patterns that you reenact over your life over and over again, you are watering and fertilizing those patterns like you would a root in a tree. And the stronger and more ingrained and deeper those roots get in our brain, and they become hard to break. Um, and so, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
I
yeah,
think
I
you
mean,
did. I want to ask one more related to a couple things you said.
okay.
So you talked about how it showed up for you around, or how it can show up for others, anxiety, depression, all these things that people are that show up, and then how they cope. Well, I've worked with several entrepreneurs, and sometimes they'll be like, well, that's my entrepreneurial edge, because if I'm not stressed and if I'm not anxious, then I won't be hustling. And like you were saying, what did you call it? You called it, I can't remember what you called it, but I'll call it hustle for now. And I said, well, that might be your short term entrepreneurial edge, but it's your fast pass to your entrepreneurial grave, because you create that low grade inflammation, right? You also create those patterns that you're talking about that lead to more unhealthy coping mechanisms. And so we know, right? Anxiety is the fear of something that's either in the past or in the future, but it's not real. So we tend to think like we have something that we have to survive from, and then we get caught in that pattern. I love what Dr. Joe Dispenza says. He talks about, like you were saying, a past present. So if our filing cabinet is full of all of our patterns from the past, and we make all of our decisions and choose all of our actions based upon the past, we have no way of recreating anything new. So we create a past present and a past future. So help our listeners, George, understand, how did you get out of those patterns? How did you break out of that filing cabinet? And how did you begin to rewire and rewrite your present and your future with new information?
Well, neurologically, and all of this stuff traces to the brain. And so,
Mhm.
um, what needs to happen is that we need to decide that these patterns are no longer helpful and that they're unwanted. Um, and we could talk a little bit about that claim you made from certain entrepreneurs that that's their edge. I would dispute that, because I was that guy that thought that.
Let's
but
talk about that. I think
but
it's really important on this podcast for somebody to hear from not a newbie entrepreneur, right? I was in corporate America for 25 years, but a successful entrepreneur that hit the top and thought that was his edge. How did you realize it wasn't?
well, um, first of all, it was, I was just highly activated all the time. My nervous system was dysregulated. And so, just from a strictly brain performance perspective, um, mental resources are finite. Like, we only start every day with so many of them. And when you are operating at that level of activation, you are burning mental resources. And by mental resources, I mean neurotransmitters, um, glucose, um, all of the various domains you have around your brain that, whether it's attention or motivation or cognition or emotional regulation, those are all individual brain domains that are they're like individual tanks that fill up with resource at the beginning of the day if we wake up feeling rested, and then they begin to draw down as the day goes on. But if you are stressed out and activated on a chronic basis, and you never want to come down from that, you're spending those mental resources at 2 to 3 times the rate that you otherwise would have. And so, like you said, that's maybe okay for very short periods of time, but then you need to rest and recover. The brain just simply does not work that way, where it can go endless periods of time on high activation without recovery. Um, that is going to simply lead to bad outcomes of various types. Um, so from a brain performance perspective, that's just a horrible plan, and that comes from not understanding how the brain functions and not being able to, partner with it and develop a relationship that's, an understanding that you have to give to the brain in order for the brain to give back to you.
Can I play devil's advocate for a minute? Because
Sure.
I'm in alignment with you, and I want people to hear some of the things that I get arguments about, right? So
Mhm.
how many years were you successful before you started crumbling?
Yeah. So from 22 to 52, I hit bottom in 52 at 52. So I was highly functional throughout, 30 of those years. The last 2 years were a little difficult as I began to, you know, deteriorate from addiction.
So people that are similar to you, right? Where they feel like they're super successful, they're making a lot of money, whatever they're doing in their entrepreneurship, they're at the top of their game. And they're like, well, you know how the subconscious mind works. It believes that the anxiety or the stress is the solution to something it fears is worse, right? Failure, unacceptance, judgment, whatever the flavor is, right? Why people are motivated to do that. So if somebody feels externally they're successful and right now that in their mind is the goal, how do they pause a hot second to see it's not a long-term game and have the confidence in what you're saying and what we say at Limitless You that really it isn't their entrepreneurial edge? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, I think so. But, first of all, you know, in order for somebody to want to change, they have to think that something's not right or working well.
Right.
And so, first, the brain is very resistant to change to begin with because its main job is to keep you safe in survival and conserve resources in the process. So it doesn't care, um, whether you have a bigger house or a nicer car or all those other things. Its only job is to try to conserve resources and keep you safe. And so, it's only going to follow along with what you train it to be, um, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm asking is if you're surviving, so your subconscious mind is happy, and maybe your business is successful, but you're operating from that heightened state that you were talking about that actually is degrading yourself on the inside, right? It's causing dis-ease, which will follow with disease. How do people wake up without some kind of desperate rock bottom thing? Like, what would you have them start thinking about in new ways? Like, what do you wish, George? What do you wish? What would have worked for you 10, 15 years before you hit rock bottom? What do you think you would have advised yourself to do?
Well, I guess the question is, are you really happy, fulfilled, and do you have, true meaning in your life? I mean, there's six core psychological needs that we're all trying to meet as human beings: autonomy, equality, significance, skillfulness, stability, and togetherness. And we all have those in different degrees based on where we are in our lives and what's most important to us at that time. And so, um, we just have to ask ourselves, are we feeling mental friction or not in the way that we're conducting our lives? And so someone may go along just fine, like you say, making a bunch of money, Um, and they may have very high needs in autonomy. Most entrepreneurs do, right? They want to be in control of their destiny, and very high needs in skillfulness and significance, and that may be what's driving their life. And so making money is that measure of success. And so if they're happy with that, um, and they're meeting those needs, then maybe they don't see a need to change. So it really comes down to when and how are people seeing a problem? Because it's not up for me, or I think anyone to tell someone else, hey,
Yeah.
you need to change, right?
No.
But the problem is the brain isn't going to tell you to change.
Right.
You have to decide that you need to change, because the brain is simply a record of all of your past experiences. So it just keeps predicting the patterns that you've been reinforcing over the years. And so it doesn't care whether you're happy or not. It's just trying to predict how to handle certain situations. If all you've ever shown it is to grind as an entrepreneur and make money, then that's what it knows, and that's what it keeps presenting to you. But if consequences start to appear in your life, or your needs start to shift, or your wife leaves you because all you ever do is work, or you don't know who your kids are, and that starts to bum you out, or you just simply don't feel fulfilled because you've made all this money, but somehow you're still not happy. When those things start to happen, then maybe you're more willing to take a look at, well, why is this the case? Why am I not happy? Why am I experiencing this mental friction? And invariably, it comes down to there's an identity that you want for yourself that the way you're currently conducting your life is not meeting. And
Mm-hmm.
so these needs can shift and take different priorities at different stages of your life. And so, you can be one way in your 20s and be just fine with it, but as you get into your 40s, you may not be as fine with it anymore because you've got enough money and you're still not happy. And so now you're looking around like, well, I'm not fulfilled. Isn't there any more to this?
Yeah.
I don't have great relationships. I've sacrificed all this stuff to make this happen. And so now that's the time to say, hey, can things be different?
Yeah, I love that. There's so many things that I want to pull the thread on. The first is like, can you say, because it's a simple thing that I did when I was first making my transition from corporate America to here, and even back before, actually, I was always like, why isn't this working? Why am I not happy? I was a finance major, so I had a balanced scorecard for my life, right? Like family and friends in one quadrant, work and career in another, health and fitness in another, and then spirituality. Now it's got eight facets, if you will. And it's called the Limitless You Life Compass. And you can get it at unlocklimitlessyou.com, learn more about that. But I want to hear, and I want you to read slowly or just say slowly. So people listening, what were those 6 things? Because I think we get tunnel vision, especially when you probably have heard of like convergent focus versus divergent focus. And when we're hustling and when we're grinding, we're in like this convergent focus to like a certain goal and to win, and we're not open, we're not slowing down, we're not patient. And so we're looking at one facet of our life when we're deciding if
Yeah,
we're happy or not. And then we
that's when
spend
the
all this time hustling and we get there and like crap, it didn't work. So can you repeat, what were those 6 areas that you feel are the needs people should be like contemplating so people can jot those down?
well, they're not the needs that I feel. These are the 6 human needs that people have. They're universal, um, and science has produced those. It's autonomy, so the need to feel in control of our own destiny and have the latitude to do so. Equality, the need to feel like things are fair and that we have equal opportunity to be who we want to be. Skillfulness, the need to feel adept, and skillful in whatever we're choosing to do. Significant, so how we look at ourselves and how we look at ourselves in relation to others. Do we feel worthy? Stability. Do we feel safe? And do we feel like protected? And do we feel like we're going to be okay? And then togetherness, the need to feel connected to others, socially interacted and interactive, um, and enriched that way.
Yeah. It's very interesting as you're reading those, I was thinking about how life and conditioning and everything around us could lead us down a path where those needs we think are met, but they're very surface driven. Because I loved what Dr. Gabor Mate says around that people have kind of two needs as children, right? One is attachment, because we die as infants, we cannot live on our own. The other is authenticity. That one wasn't in this list, but I'm thinking, if you don't first have authenticity, like you might feel like, oh, I'm stable and I'm together if I wear a mask. I'm stable and I'm together if I look like this other person, right? So I want to pull, and then that's where I think people start trying to deal with, like, why am I not enough, right? And they go to like these negative coping mechanisms, whether it's binge watching Netflix or overworking or abuse. So I want to hear what your thoughts are around how do we get these things, but from a place of self-love and authenticity, so that it really runs deep to who we are. Because I might feel significant, right, if I have a lot of money, but that has nothing to do with me, the human being. That has something to do with what's outside of me. And then I have all this need for external validation. So what does that
Right.
mean to you? Like, as you went through, like, you probably had a lot of these things as a successful entrepreneur on the surface, but perhaps not on the inside. Talk to us about that.
Well, the significance need is a very good example. So let's just say that, you start out after college and, you're going to work your butt off because you have this need to make money. That's how you're going to satisfy this need for significance. But then you try that for a while and maybe you accumulate those resources. But now all of a sudden, and you've got them, but now all of a sudden that no longer is satisfying this need for significance. In other words, you need to feel significant in a different way. So you're quote unquote meeting that need as you have in the past, but that you're no longer meeting uh, the significant need the way it's evolving. And so our identity, how we view ourselves is always a moving target. It's always being constructed in real time. All mental life gets constructed in the moment. That's how mental life gets created, and it uses past experiences as part of that. But these things evolve over time as we grow older and things change in our lives. So we might be struggling in the sense that we still have this need for significance because we always will, but this old way that we've been meeting it is no longer working.
Yeah.
And so now we have mental friction. That's exactly the point. And so the cure for this is to take a real hard look at what the identity that you want for yourself is. What is this identity that um, is meaningful to me going forward? And so that's made up of our values, um, our strengths, the character traits that we want for ourselves, our belief systems about ourselves and the world around us. And that's like the soil. And so that all has to be worked with, amended, identified, understood. And that's what I do with people is I help outline this version of themselves that go to their core of who they are and who they want to be. Okay. But then what's critical, and that's very much like, let me give you an analogy of that. So let's say that you're an actor and you're going to start a new movie, shooting a new movie, and the director gives you the screenplay, and here's your character. And this is a brand new character you know nothing about, um, and you need to go away and identify how that new character thinks, feels, behaves, what's important to them, what their values are, their belief systems. Like this is like either an actor becoming a new role or like a CIA operative taking on a new legend in a foreign assignment in some foreign country. Like they become different people. So that's what we're doing is we're designing this character for ourselves, the ideal version of ourselves. Okay. And then we have to start acting like it. So we have to rehearse like an actor would. So if we identify through this process of understanding our values and the traits that we want, that we're going to try to meet significance in a new and different way that's more meaningful to us, then we then have to change, because this old route of endlessly grinding to make more money is causing mental friction because the need is not being met. It's an unmet need. And so then we have to design more healthy, appropriate, identity aligned, and that's critical, identity aligned ways to meet the need so that we remove the mental friction. But then because it's new and the brain doesn't know about it until we start to practice it, it's challenging at first because the brain doesn't know if it's safe and it doesn't know how many resources it's going to take. Remember that the brain's job is to keep us safe and to conserve resources. So that's why change at the beginning of any type is challenging, because it's all up here in the conscious mind. It's in the front of the brain where it's expending a lot of resources because we have to think about it. We have to try hard. We have to commit to it, dedicated to it, willpower, yada, yada. But the more that we do it, and the more that we attach positive emotional salience and mental and reward to it, in other words, we start to experience the good things that we envisioned that were going to happen when we identified this, we start to experience it, then the brain begins to say, wow, that's not only safe, but it's rewarding. And actually, it's starting to meet my need for significance more than the old way did. So now I'm going to start resisting less. And that's where habits start to form, is because, the brain begins to experience that whole closed loop around there's a cue, I do the behavior, I get a reward, that's all great, let's do it again. And so that's what this whole process of becoming more aligned with a new and preferred identity is rehearsing. The brain works on repetition over and over and over again, plus emotional salience that's positive, because emotional salience is like lighter fluid on a charcoal where it's sticky. It really adds meaning, and it really causes those neural pathways to get strong and ingrained. And then there's a reward component, right? Because the brain doesn't want to do anything unless there's something in it for it. It's like a dog learning a new trick. You're never going to get a dog to do something unless you have a treat for it. The brain's the same way. So there's always got to be high levels of emotion and reward attached to these new things that we're trying to do in order for them to get ingrained, in order for this to begin to gradually, and there's no light switch in any of this stuff. It is a gradual repetition, emotionally based motivation or reward motivating experience that happens over time.
I love that. I think we've given people a really good taste of what I want to cover in our second part of this series. Before we close out the first part, I want to talk about, just listening to all that. If somebody's listening and they're like, that sounds like a lot of work, I think I'd just rather go get a glass of wine or a beer. That makes me want to go get a drink, they say, right? And you've talked about your recovery wasn't about willpower, it was about rewiring, and addiction is so often misunderstood. Like, can you let's end this first part of this series, right, on a better understanding of what's happening in around the places that we don't want to continue. And in the second part, we're going to talk about tactical things people can do for them. Can you explain what's actually happening in the brain during addiction, and why do you get stuck in that loop of self-sabotage knowing it's not a moral failure? Like, what is going on in the brain?
Yeah. So first of all, there's two qualifiers that will cause somebody to be much more likely to be an addict. The first is genetic predisposition, which means you have it in your family. And so generally, now that means you have genetic predisposition. It doesn't mean that the genes are going to express so that you automatically, like, just out of nowhere become an addict. But generally, if you have adverse childhood experiences, related to your upbringing that's stressful, those genes will express. And so then you are much more likely, should you start to use and drink, to become an addict. And then you have the adverse childhood experiences that cause uncomfortable patterns that you are trying to get through your early years of your life feeling safe, but you're being challenged in that way. And so you have anxiety and self-doubt and self-esteem issues. And so you're more likely to cope with drugs and alcohol. So when you have the combination of adverse childhood experiences and genetic predisposition, you're much more likely to become an addict, 10 to 12 more time, 10 to 12 times more likely than a person that doesn't have either of those conditions. What happens in the brain is the brain loves reward, and dopamine is the reward chemical, the motivation chemical. And the problem with substances is, one of the many, that they deliver 2 to 10 times more dopamine uh, um, surge than any of our normal life experiences. So we
Even
are,
more than chocolate.
yeah, sorry, um, more than chocolate, more than the best sex you've ever had, more than the best meal you've ever had, more than falling in love. They're that powerful.
Hmm.
And so because the brain is so geared towards reward to be motivated, these neurochemicals, when it's getting that type of um, spiking of dopamine levels due to substances, normal life pleasures just don't seem relevant anymore to it. And so
Yeah.
what happens is the dopamine system stops working for normal life pleasures. And so the only thing that holds meaning to the brain is where can it get more of that high surge substance. And so that's what causes the hijacking of the reward system of the brain. You get caught in this loop. And then what happens is, because there's so much dopamine, more than the brain was ever intended to handle, it's like watering a small plant with a fire hose, is that the receptors in the brain, the receptors in the neurons begin to shut down because there's just too much dopamine. And so now that's tolerance. That means that's why you have to keep doing more and more to get the same effect, because not as much chemical can get through because the receptors are starting to shut down because there's too much of it. And so then we have to keep doing more and more to try to get, the chemical to get through. And so that's what tolerance is. And so that's this nasty cycle of addiction where the only thing that matters is the substance, because it's the only thing your brain feels like it's going to give it enough dopamine. And then the brain starts to shut down because it's too much dopamine. So you have to keep doing more and more. And it just ends up where I ended up doing 50 pain pills a day and 2 bottles of vodka. And
Yeah.
the body and brain just simply can't handle that, and you begin to shut down.
Yeah. The very thing that you're doing it for, to avoid, you end up creating, right? A
Yeah.
lot more suffering, a lot more pain.
Yeah.
So,
It's
for the listener that might not catch part 2 of this, I do want to give them an actionable something to think about, something to go research, something to do before we close today's episode. I'm going to put George's contact information. You can contact George at georgehaymaker.com. But please, please, please listen into next week's episode. We're going to dive even deeper. But for now, George, for the listener who's trying to quote unquote do better, it's trying to, like, they know it's bad for them, but always slip back. What is the one insight from brain science that might offer a new path forward, an opening of a window, at least, that they didn't know they had an option to open, a way out?
Yeah, I really think it boils down to understanding how your brain works. And that's my focus, is on educating people about the brain so they can become involved in the process of reading what their brain is trying to tell them, and just becoming an active partner. So the brain, again, is neuroplastic, which means it can change, adapt, and evolve. That's how it's designed. And so just the same way that you've created your patterns over your lifetime with all the experiences you've ever had, all the thoughts and feelings and behaviors you've ever had, even if they were out of your control. Like, let's say they all started in childhood, which for many of us, they did. And we just happened to survive at that time of our lives in whatever way that we could to meet those 6 needs I described. But as we've gotten older, those ways are now unhelpful and they're causing mental friction. And so the good news is because the brain is neuroplastic, those neurons that have formed, they can be broken apart and form new patterns. So
Mhm.
the science is completely in your favor in that it just takes you to get the help you need. It's hard for people to do this on their own because again, they're dealing with a brain that doesn't really want to change until it begins to experience what the change is and knows that it's safe and rewarding. And so it takes the individual to have faith. And typically, I needed help. Like there's no way I could have changed on my own. So I had to go to rehab, go to a 12-step program. And so I highly encourage people to seek out whatever help they need, just for somebody that knows the path and can help them. A lot of time, that's just the comfort they need to get started and the accountability that they need. Um, and so the science is in your favor. I didn't know it was. I didn't know anything about the brain, but I assure you that it is, and it can happen. I mean, if myself and any number of other people that have been through hardcore addiction or any other major changes and transformations, the stories are endless out there. So it's possible. It's just, are you gonna decide that it's bad enough now, um, or are you just going to wait and let it continue to get worse? Is this the life that you want to have for the rest of your life? Are you going to have regrets at some point of your life that you did not change in the ways that are important to you? Because the time is ticking, and that's what I had to come to grips with at
Yeah.
52. Was this the way I wanted to go out, or was I going to try one more time to not, because I would have been really bummed out had I gone out of this world living the way that I had.
Yeah. I think what you said is so important. I always share with people that there's so much information out there, but don't just trust anybody. Don't just try and do it all because number one, it's conflicting a lot of the times. Find somebody that's been where you're at and now they're somewhere else. They're somewhere better. They're where you want to be. So reach out to George at georgehaymaker.com. He gets it. He's lived it. And now he's thriving and no longer just trying to survive. If you are interested in like taking a subconscious safari to figure out why in the world did I even think that this was a good idea for me to do? What in the world happened to me in childhood? What limiting beliefs do I have? Reach out to me at unlocklimitlessyou.com/call. We'll talk about what a subconscious safari means. We'll talk about how you can discover. And if you're like, I don't even know what, my identity, is this normal? Is it not normal? Is it healthy? Is it not healthy? Go take a self-love quiz. I know you're an entrepreneur. You're very busy. Unlocklimitlessyou.com/quiz. It only takes 5 minutes, 12 questions. And it's just thoughtful ways to think about what is your way of being with yourself? What is your way of being with other people that might give you some insight into could you be happier? So stay tuned for next week. We're going to dive into practical tools and even more science-backed strategies with George. If you've ever felt like you're succeeding on the outside, but you were silently breaking down on the inside, George's story is proof you're not alone and there is a way out. So we're going to dive deeper into the tools, the practices, the science-backed strategies that help George rewire his brain and change the trajectory of his life. So be sure to follow the show. And if today's episode stirred something in you, share it with a friend because this isn't just about healing. This is about connection with self and others. Until next time, find your joy, your way, and don't be afraid to ask for help.
Hit subscribe if you don't want to miss out on more life-changing content. And if you're struggling, you don't have to. Go to bradchandler.com/contact. There, you can join the Facebook community of like-minded entrepreneurs, and you'll see a button to schedule your freedom and happiness call. See you on the next episode.